Well, hi there, spiritual wayfinders. Welcome to the Betwixt podcast, a waypoint for inspiring conversation and grounding practices that help us navigate the spiritual life with embodied wisdom. I'm Deb Gregory. This episode is released in partnership with InterVarsity Press. You can get 25% off my new book, Spiritual Wayfinding, with the code IVPOD25 at ivpress.com/spiritual-wayfinding. That's IVPOD25 for 25% off and free U.S. shipping. I'm joined by Mark Buchanan, pastor, teacher, and beloved author, whose work helps us notice the sacred threads woven through ordinary life. Mark is a professor at Ambrose University, where he teaches pastoral theology and guides students in cultivating spiritual imagination, embodied wisdom, and courage for difficult times. Today, we'll talk about walking as a spiritual practice through his book, God Walk. We'll also touch on his newest release, What Is Left of the Night, a World War II novel that speaks into the moral tensions of our own moment. So join us as we explore how the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other can slow us down, ground us in humility, and reshape how we see God, ourselves, and the world. Mark Buchanan, I'm so delighted that you are joining me on the Betwixt podcast today. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you love.
Well, Deb Gregory, I'm delighted to be here. I'm a Canadian born and bred. I was a pastor for many years. I married to Cheryl for over 40 years, have 3 grown children who are amazing and wonderful and vexing. I currently, for the last 13 years, have been a seminary professor. And I'm author for many years, a wanderer and a wanderer. I love mostly the wild places, so if you're looking for me, I'm probably out in the woods.
And where are you living? You're surrounded by some woods right now,
Yeah,
aren't you?
I'm out in the middle of nowhere, but it's gorgeous. It's called Caroline, Alberta, so it's an hour and a half or so north of Calgary. We sit alongside the Rocky Mountains, so it's wild country. It's heavily treed. It's jagged kind of landscape, and this is where I spend my days.
That's beautiful. So I like to start with the body because this season is all about embodied spirituality. And I sent you some walking meditations that you could try. You didn't have a chance to try them, but you
I
read
read them,
them.
yeah.
Maybe just share what piqued your interest and how you might walk them, or share something about a way of walking that engaged your body or your imagination in a way that was transformative.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I loved the 2 meditations. Can't wait for your book. What's this first part of the title?
Spiritual wayfinding.
Oh, it's gorgeous. You're such a good writer, and it's very evocative and invitational. And immediately I thought, man, I wish I'd read this earlier. And later on today, I'll go for a walk and incorporate them. What grabbed me about the 2 pieces you sent? One was about navigating by trees, just figuring out kind of where you are by noticing the growth on trees, that they're going to bend toward light, but it's not that obvious. It's not necessarily sunlight, so they might reflected light off a pond. And the way you integrated that, I mean, I just love the writing, to be honest. I was just sort of caught up in the wonder and the beauty of it. And I'm in the forest all the time, and I do know you do navigate, north to south according to sort of growth patterns. But you taught me in a very short order a lot. The one that really grabbed me, and I'm gonna actually put on my shoes later today, is this sort of this first shoe is God. Is it God's glory or
God's love.
God's
Yeah.
love, yeah, God's love, and the
God's
second is
love.
humility, and it's sort of the 1-2 walking that I'm sort of keeping in step. I'm walking into God's love, but I do it with humility. So the way you masterfully, in so few words, say so much, and one of them is a sense that that's a Micah walk, walking humbly into the character of God, into the presence of God. So that, to me, that's gonna be, like, not just my walk today, I think that's gonna be incorporated into how I think about walking. So thank you for that.
Wonderful.
Can't wait to literally put my shoes on.
Oh, that's so great. And that's very kind. Thank you for that. Well, I'm I'm also curious about this conversation of humility with you. You've written the book God Walk, and I don't remember you saying too much explicitly about humility throughout the book, but it felt to me that that's also really what you were talking about. You invite us to slow down. And we're in a culture that prizes speed, that prizes achievement,
Yeah.
that prizes being seen. And to me, the way that you and God walk invite us into walking really is kind of an antithesis to all those things. So I'm just curious what that act of walking taught you about humility.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you sussed out or sensed sort of that there's a sort of a pulse of humility because honestly, it's been one of the keystones of my own journey of, well, I mean, God resists the proud and he raises up the humble. And I think that if we don't engage in a deliberate project of humility, life will do it for us. That
Mm.
life, you have a beautiful phrase in one of the chapters you sent me. You had injured yourself and sort of learned to walk again. And you could either do that, the humiliation of stumbling along, or do it in humility. That's the thing on the one step, two step. That really struck me because I really think that that's the discovery of, anybody who's kind of wide awake, living their life. Somebody asked me once, you've written a bunch of books and et cetera, and you get invited, to places to speak. How do you keep humble? And my instant sort of thought and comment was, how do you stay arrogant? Life builds into it a project of either it's kind of humiliation, but
Yeah.
the walking with God is instead the path of humility. So I think inherently walking is a humble thing because it slows us down. We feel weirdly in control of a car. Car is a massive, dangerous thing that hurtles through,
Yes.
time and space with it at great speed. And so there's a weird sort of hubris that comes when we're driving a car, or even weirdly when we're a plane and we're not the pilot, but we get upset if there's a half-hour delay on the plane. My goodness, we're going to make a journey in 4 hours. It, took people, babies would be born on the way in other eras. And so this sort of hubris around speed. Walking is actually where we are in control, literally. We're carrying ourselves. And yet it's so inherently humbling because it takes so long and you start to feel your body in a way you don't when you're in a plane or driving. You start to feel the aches, the burrs, the blisters. And so it just is a constant kind of reminder of our limitations. And it also, by its very nature, draws us into kind of a reflection, a sort of a contemplating of what's around us and an attentiveness to what's inside of us. Like it's just by nature it does that. You don't really even work at it. It'll just happen. And that sort of journey inward, journey outward is, I think, designed to be humbling. Just
Hmm.
a quick example. I mean, if you're walking where I get to walk every day, these incredible forests and mountains and all of that, it's humbling in the sense that it's just exquisite handicraft of God, craftsmanship of God. It's also dangerous. There's bears in these woods.
Yeah.
There's wolves, coyotes. We're coming into the season where moose start showing up, and they can be dangerous
Don't
animals and
say
all that.
snakes. That's what I'm
Actually,
afraid of.
we're not
The
really
snakes.
snaky. We're not really snaky here.
Okay. I'd be
Yeah.
okay then.
Yeah, there's parts of Canada that are very snaky, but not so much here. And so I'm aware, my vulnerability. I don't have
Mm.
there's nothing between me and the wilderness in a sense. So there's just something humbling about that. And then when walking draws you into reflection, I don't know if you can be a reflective person and not a humble person because we're so aware of our own folly, frailty, failings, foibles. There's a bunch of F words we could pile on, but I mean, it's just sort of like there's this kinda inner voice, and it can be the inner voice of accusation, and, of course, part of
Mm.
spiritual discipline is hearing the inner voice, the voice of love. But even that love, we know that God's love for us is not, "Oh, you're so amazing, your accomplishments bedazzle me," but it's this tender father love of kind of a kind of a pitying love in a way like, like he feels for us the bruised reed of us, the broken vessel of us.
Mm.
He has a deep compassion for that. And so I just think
Yeah.
self-reflection, just in if you're doing it with a kind of authenticity, it's gonna lead to sort of humility, gratitude as well, because you realize the deep love
Mhm.
of God, but it's just very hard to sort of get inside yourself and stay proud.
Yeah, that's true. What's that different from rumination? Because sometimes we can walk and start ruminating, right? But then you're talking about a kind of walk that's more reflective, that
Yeah,
draws us into the reality of what is, right?
and when you say ruminate, are you sort of meaning like kind of, uh, circling the drain or obsessing a bit?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just kind of circling with the anxious thoughts and
right.
self-condemnation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a place to go. I think just walk it out. Like, I think long walks will break you from that. Well, I can only speak personally. Often walks begin with rumination and lead to contemplation
Hmm.
and kind of fresh insight. So there's no question, the first 20 minutes are often, how dare you? Why did you? That sort of self condemnation, that rumination, that kind of boring down too deep into one area. Um, but I find that if I keep walking, there's something, the ancients all knew this. There's a wonderful, weird essay by Henry David Thoreau on walking, but he just walked a lot and he really reflected deeply on some of these patterns that we're identifying, Deb. This way that walking kind of leads to something without us necessarily being highly intentional about it. There's something about the body finally triggering or awakening something where we can't stay in that stuckness. We can't stay in that place of just, constant beating ourselves up, but we kind of come to some new clarity.
You write about walking as a spiritual practice, and you've made this argument that other religions often have some kind of physical practice associated with them. And you argue that walking might be the practice for Christians. Say more about that. Why is
Yeah.
walking a spiritual practice and specifically for Christians?
Yeah, so it had bothered me for a long time, and really writing this book was a bit of a catharsis of this annoyance. Most famously Hinduism and yoga. Yoga actually predates weirdly Hinduism, but Hinduism adopted it as their physiology, really. This is how you, to use the Christian word, incarnate the things that you believe. And so in the body, you experience sort of the depths of your convictions. And it bothered me that, the religion that is predicated on incarnation, the word becoming flesh, dwelling among us, had no corresponding physiology. We didn't have a practice that helped us embody it. I mean, honestly, for years that just vexed me and troubled me. I would see the sort of incongruence of people talking about how Christ came among us, became one of us, and yet real neglect of personal health in terms of
Hmm.
eating or exercise. So I just thought, man, it is like a bit of a tragedy that we didn't get something corresponding in terms of physical embodiment. And then I was reading, I think, John's gospel, and he just uses the word walk, walk, walk so much. And John's a bit hard to parse because he's thinking at a more philosophical, abstract level than the other gospel writers. But I realized, oh my goodness, this is a walking culture. The whole biblical story is about people making journeys on foot. They rarely had any other modes of transport. They were footbound. And Jesus himself, completely models that, where he goes on this 3-year kind of hiking tour of Israel, mostly northern Israel, and tends
Yeah,
to take the longest route. Like when you track out, say, the Gospel of Mark, which is
that's
most
true.
kinetic, he like, "Oh, let's go to Tyre, but let's go, the roundabout way." So he's always sort of taking the longest way there in general, and I'm like, "What is that about? Like, why not sort of look at the map and find the beeline?" And I realized so much would have been happening in the walking. But, if you go for a
Yeah.
walk with a friend, you experience the friendship in a very different way than even if you go for a long road trip with them. So I just started
Yes.
to realize, is the secret physiology or physical practice of Christianity actually walking? It was so kind of embedded, it was so integrated into Christian spirituality that nobody thought to say so. They were saying so in terms of how many times walking is used seemingly as a metaphor, but maybe not. Walk in light, walk in truth, walk in faith. Maybe they meant it at a much more kind of literal level than that I was reading that. And then you go back right to the beginning. What do we have? The God who comes to walk in the cool of the day. with the first couple. And Enoch walked with God. I mean, we start getting that walking language very early in the scriptures. So honestly, Deb, I mean, it was sort of like one of those moments you've had them, your listeners have had them, where something you've kind of known and never knew. That it just,
Yes.
yeah. So I always knew this and never knew this, and it all comes rushing in. And then I'm scrambling to kind of find all the references and look at them in depth and study them in the original, all that sort of stuff. And I came away utterly convinced that walking is the premier spiritual practice for Christians. And so that just energized the book. I was actually writing the book before that really came together for me. And boy, did it ever
Oh,
catalyze
wow.
my sense of the urgency of it.
Yeah. How did it change the way you were walking? Because I'm guessing you've been a walker
Well,
for a
forever.
long
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
but did that
Yeah. Long, long
change?
time. Yeah, it absolutely did. Walking and Sabbath are maybe my two main spiritual practices. So I have an ongoing life of nurturing myself by the word and all the classic, the prayer and fasting. I do all these things, and they're all very good, and I wouldn't throw any of them out. But where I tend to meet God is in Sabbathing and in walking, where I really hear God, where God convicts me or reveals to me or humbles me, things we talked about. I hadn't quite identified it until I put together this theology underneath it. So now I go, and again, I don't try to force anything on a walk. I don't like, God, I'm going for my walk now. Meet me at the third beech tree or whatever. But I do have this kind of level of expectancy that in some ways, whatever I'm needing, whether it's some revelation or some word or some comfort or some conviction or something, whatever I'm needing that even I may not be wholly aware of, God will somehow on the way find me on the way. Road to Emmaus has been such a keystone story. I think every book I've written, and I have my 13th coming out, maybe all but two, I've riffed on the Luke 24, the Road to Emmaus story, which is just to me the paradigm of life. You're walking, you're slumped, you're miserable, you're preoccupied, you're ruminating, whatever. These two disciples, that one isn't named and the other we never met, and suddenly Jesus is walking along, and for quite a stretch. It's 7 miles journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus at 3.5 miles an hour, which is normally what we go 3 to 3.5 miles an hour. We're talking a 2 to 3 hour walk. So this is a bit of a
Yeah.
go, and he has enough time to kind of unpack the Old Testament scriptures for them, but they don't recognize him. They have some weird bodily experience. Their hearts burn within them, so they're viscerally kind of having some say, "Well, something's happening here." But it's only later when they sit down in the house and Jesus breaks the bread that Jesus, it was Jesus. So that to me is so paradigmatic, because I think that is a model for how God meets us. And it doesn't have to be walking, Deb. It could be, just doing your thing. And the Lord's right there, but you don't get it. And later you do. But preeminently that happens for me in walking. It just does. And so because of that, and again, I'm not trying to manage this. I'm not trying to make it happen. It just tends to happen. I've got so much response from readers over the years since the book came out that it seems that it's hit that nerve that people like, I've always walked. This helped me have a greater clarity about, why or what goes on or how the Lord's met me. The book's kind of like a love letter to walking. It's a bit of a pay-in to it. And mostly, I mean, I really hope just people walk more, and even if it was just for the physical benefit of it, I just hope they would walk more. But certainly, I've
Yeah.
written what I hope is a spirituality of walking, and I hope
Yeah.
readers will discover the deeper stuff.
Yeah, and walking is interesting because you may walk the same path each day, but you
Yeah.
have such a very different experience, and you can't really control what's gonna happen.
No, you can't. And yeah, and no matter what, like me in the wilderness, but if you're in a city, walking scales you to the human dimensions.
Yeah.
So there's a that inbuilt humility, vulnerability in it. So, and you can walk that same path every day wherever it is. And it's like you're now in a different world, even though, you turn right at 3rd Street or whatever.
Let's pause here at a trail marker and get our bearings. On the road to Emmaus, the disciples walked for miles beside Jesus without recognizing him. Their minds didn't register what was happening, but something in their bodies did. The disciples later described it as a burning, a resonance, an inner hum that preceded their understanding. What's striking is that research today affirms this kind of knowing. Studies in embodied cognition show that our bodies often perceive meaning before our brains can even articulate it. And movement, especially walking, can heighten this form of perception. While walking, sensory systems open, attention widens, and the body becomes a site of insight rather than just a vehicle for getting somewhere. And there's more. Neuroscience research on interpersonal synchrony shows that when people walk side by side, their bodies naturally fall into rhythm. Heart rates align, breathing patterns match, even brain waves begin to synchronize. This attunement happens beneath conscious awareness, creating a shared field of connection. So when the Emmaus travelers say their hearts burned within them, it may not have been a mere metaphor. Long before their minds could make sense of what was happening, their bodies were already sensing, already resonating with the one who walked beside them. Sometimes our deepest knowing begins in the body, in that quiet hum beneath our thoughts, in the subtle burn of recognition, in the shared rhythm of walking with another. I've been very interested in this way that people hear from God, right? And my daughter's neurodivergent, and we've walked together. So most of the book is written with her in companionship, and she's teaching me about
Mm.
the sensory system in ways that I didn't know about. But one of the things I was curious about through conversation with her is just the different ways that we hear from God,
Yeah.
right? She's like, well, I don't hear audibly. It's more of like a resonance. And being out in nature, she feels more in tune with this bigger story and more resonant with it than she does when she's just kind of in her room or just, doing some of these more individualistic practices. What's your thought on that?
Well, first of all, I can't wait for this book that you have written, and now to hear that you've written it with your neurodivergent daughter makes me even more. I actually am more and more inclined to think that neurodivergence, that it's closer, maybe. I'm gonna take a risk here. It's closer to how God wired us. It seems to me the prophets were all neurodivergent. That they heard and
Oh,
saw and felt all, in ways that we like,
yeah.
that's odd. But I think Ian McGilchrist, talking about, one half of the brain. Is it the left brain that's sort of all the rational and the right brain, or the other way around?
I don't remember.
But that one sort of hemisphere of the brain colonized the other over time because of just some of the ways
Mm,
we taught and the way we sort
right.
of, valued, say book learning and written exercises over sensory, artistic, evocative, imaginative things. So we end up colonizing part of our brain, one side, the rational, logical, linear part, colonized the imaginative, dreamy part. And there's been long studies, I think the, famous book, Reenchantment of the World. But I mean, it's predicated this idea that probably, when we're reading stuff in Old Testament, for instance, and reading the prophets, we're witnessing people whose brains were more wired up together. And so there was a kind of a cross wiring, a synesthesia, between
Mm,
hearing and seeing and smelling
right.
and tasting and touching, and all of these things cross-wired in a way that they don't in most of our brains. So there seems to me that neurodivergent people are a little bit of a glimpse of the way God meant us to be. And yet we live in a society that doesn't get it and kind of marginalizes it and stigmatizes it. So that, I think, creates some social structures that are unhelpful, to be honest. So that was a long little rant and riff about that. My experience with walking and being among neurodivergent people is that they do have something very much to teach us about how God speaks. These resonances, these things that kind of hum and burn, and you feel them. And again, I come to the story that we talked about a few moments ago, the Luke 24 road to Emmaus. What do these guys say? They don't recognize Jesus' voice. He's doing his exegesis of the Old Testament. They don't get that. What they get is our hearts were burning within us when he walked with us and
Yes.
talked with us on the road. That there was it was just like your daughter says, it kind of, there's something was humming, something was burning. So
Yes.
I am trying to be more attentive to, like, I think it's so muted in me. It's so banked down. It's so colonized in me that I want to think in very linear ways, but that walking embodies you literally. So I think I'm becoming a mystic, Deb, in a kind of a, I think I'm being,
Yes.
I think if you don't become a mystic in the end, heaven will be a shocking revelation if you're not
Ugh.
a little bit on a journey to being a mystic, because I think it's so exceedingly abundantly more than we could ask or imagine. It's no mind has seen, no ear has heard, etc. What Paul says, that if we don't sort of start to cultivate mysticism, I hope this isn't going to get you in trouble with your listeners, what we're talking about, but I think if we don't cultivate a mystical kind of
Let's do it.
openness, that God wants to meet us, speak to us in ways that kind of transcend our normal ways of understanding, which are very much captured by, let's get into the critical, exegetical, historical, exploration of scripture and all of that sort of stuff.
Yes.
And this thing that kind of just leaves it there wallowing in its history and never actually speaks a word in season to us. So
Yeah.
I really think that until we sort of open ourselves to the possibility that God wants to meet us, speak to us in a lot of different ways, and just kind of a careful exegetical exploration of the scriptures, that he wants to meet us in the wooded vale. He wants to meet us through the red-furred fox. He wants to meet us in that thing humming in our body. I just think that we're missing a lot of the ways that God shows up. And I do think then heaven will be this shocking revelation. Oh,
Yeah.
like we'll have very little muscle memory for heaven when we'll have to learn a lot.
I love that. Yeah, I'm remembering one thing my daughter said. I said, "Well, what would you want to tell neurotypical people?" And she said, "Well, it seems like neurotypical Christians know a lot about God and the Bible, but they don't seem to have many experiences of God."
Wow.
I thought,
That
"Oh
captures it.
gosh, okay."
Well, that captures it perfectly. And that honestly is, more and more my experience. I was a pastor for 24 years, been a professor the last 23, and taken an interest personally, but also done more studying and reading on neurodivergence. And even the terms neurotypical neurodivergence, if we mean most of the population are thus and the rest are not, then fine. But I don't think the language quite gets at, I would say that your daughter's neuroconvergent. She's moving towards
Mm,
something that we're kind of, you and I are sort of way behind in
yeah.
the journey.
Yeah, there's something beautiful about that. I think it's an invitation. That's how I heard it. Ignatian spirituality is kind of
Mm.
my vein,
Yeah, I
and
see it, yeah, in
and
your book.
yeah, and one of the lines that we use a lot is to find God in all things. And really it's what you're talking about, this posture of really paying attention and expecting God to reveal God's self in surprising ways if we're just paying attention. It could be on a walk, it could be in so many different ways. Yeah.
So many different ways, and a listener thinks, so they're going off into some Eastern mysticism. I would just invite a fresh reading of scripture, because that seems to be that God has unusual ways for the most part of meeting us. Again, I've taught theology for 13 years in the seminary. So I've looked at, the Christian story and scripture through a different lens, sort of as academic, pedagogical. How do you teach this stuff? One of the things that's interesting is how few episodes we have in scripture where somebody's reading the Bible and has a revelation.
Hmm.
There are a few, but they're actually they're very few. Mostly they're walking down the road, they're going up a hill, they're, they're up on, they see Jesus transfigured. They thought they
They're
were on
walking
just a
to the
like,
well.
they're walking to the well. In fact, most of the revelation that happens in Scripture is by way of surprise and by interruption. And it's
Yes.
not what you saw coming. It's not the sort of the normal sources that you would look to or go to sort of have, uh, an encounter or some experience with God. And even the ones that are, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Maybe I was going to the temple or something, but he wasn't expecting or prepared for this. So that alone should just alert us that if we're not open to these other sources of revelation, then we're actually outside of the canon of the great story of how God's people have met God through the ages. And we're probably closing ourselves off to ways that God does want to show himself to us, that we should at least start. Get your book, get Deb's book, and just start with some of those simple exercises and see what happens.
I think that's such a great insight about looking even in scripture and how God has revealed God's self to us. Now, I do want to talk about your latest book. And also, you've written a lot of books, but you've really moved into writing novels, which I
Yeah.
find so interesting. And I'm curious, first of all, if walking is a part of that creative process, because I think there's studies about walking, are boosting creativity by 60%.
Yeah,
Tell us
certainly
about your
most of
work and then
yeah,
walking
thank you.
as
Thank
part of
you.
your creative process.
Yeah. Well, the new book, it comes out just a bit before yours, Deb. It's March 17th. It's a novel, What Is Left of the Night. It's based on a true story of a little village in France during World War II that rescued about 2,500 refugees, mostly Jews, and Christian community that was motivated largely by their Matthew 25 theology. If somebody's hungry, you should feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something, drink. Naked, clothe them, in prison, visit them. So really, that was so deep in the bones of this little Protestant village way up in the foothills of the Alps. And they mobilized to take this extraordinary risk, and some of them lost their lives. No Jewish person lost their life under their watch, but several of the villagers were caught by
Uh,
Nazis and tortured and killed. One sent to a death camp where he died. And so it's a beautiful story of courage in dark and perilous times. I was living in the little village when COVID hit, so I had to move out. So I started writing it
okay.
5, 6 years ago while I was living in this little village in France. And I did not expect, to be honest, of how many of the themes would resonate with sort of current events in the world.
Wow.
And the
Right.
rise of ideology, the diminishment of ideas, political ideas, and the ascent of ideology. You have to believe this or we're gonna go after you. Ideology always is coercive. Ideas are instructive and energizing, and we can argue about ideas, but it doesn't demonize you. Ideology always has this demonizing force to it. So
Mhm.
I mean, it was politically complicated back in 2020, no question, but not so much as 6 years later. So the
Right.
overlay into our political moment, I did not see that coming until I sort of saw it coming just in the final edits of the book. It's like, oh my goodness, this book is really as much about the moment as it was about that moment. I didn't try
Yeah.
to force that. It just kind of emerged out of the story. But
Mm.
it's just it's a beautiful, beautiful story of courage under pressure. And what makes it so gorgeous is the person spearheading it all, a pastor, true historical figure by the name of Andre Trocme and his formidable, fierce Italian wife, Magda. And they really organize these communities, his community and other ones, around this rescue operation. But I've never, in all my sort of study, come across somebody who is such a pacifist, except for maybe MLK and Gandhi. And this man met both of those people and was inspired by them. But and
Mhm.
Jesus, the pure pacifist. So he wanted to overthrow the most vicious power, the Third Reich, the Nazi Hitleristic regime, with love, with courage, with
Wow.
just this like, it's stunning story. That is what's coming out March 17th. What is left of the night? It's a quote from Isaiah. And I'm just very honored by, the opportunity to work with my publisher at this release. I moved toward novel writing around the same time that I was actually the book on walking, God Walk, came out. The same month, my first novel, David Rise, which is a trilogy I wrote on David, came out, and I've finished that trilogy
Okay.
now. The books I'd written on spirituality, thought I love those, but I just thought I've done a lot of them, and I wanted to imagine this story sort of
Mm,
in a fresh way. So four David books and then this new novel, I've sort of shifted t to fiction and probably will stay there for a while just because something in me, to talk about this sort of neurodivergence and all of this, something
yeah.
in me was kind of untapped and yearning to get out, that
Yeah.
fiction writing there's an artistry in it, there's an imaginative component that I was able to sort of, give room to. You asked about walking. I walk all of my books. God Walk, the book we've been mostly talking about, came from a long walk I had one winter day around a lake.
Wow.
The book just kind of rushed at me out of that experience. I went back to the little cottage where I was staying and wrote probably 40 pages in one sitting because it just kind of fell from the sky. But virtually every book I write, I have to go for walks to figure out where I'm stumped or get fresh inspiration or some breakthrough. All my books have been walked out.
Walked out. What's your process? Do you take a little recorder with you? Do you stop and write
No,
in a journal, or
I
do you
wish I
just kind
did.
of organize your thoughts?
Yeah, I organize my thoughts, but I have sort of memory techniques. So occasionally, if I really think I'll lose it, I'll pull out the phone and, say, thought about thus and such. But normally, I just have little memory techniques where I, associate the idea with some image, so especially if you have multiple ideas going on. You can
Yeah.
hold quite a bit in memory if you kind of have weird visual associations with them. And then the images stick with me. Oh, I thought about the duck walking down Main Street or something, and that will associate with the idea. So that's just an ancient technique actually called memory palace. And so I use it and it works. And I'm not brilliant at it, but it's my default for trying to remember stuff.
That's great. Thanks for that hack. That
You're
was
welcome.
awesome. For listeners who are curious about walking as a spiritual practice, is there an intention or something that they might try in their next walk that you would invite them into?
Yeah, I would just say walk a path that you've walked before and notice new things. Just be open to what haven't you seen before. Just look for some fresh thing, and just take note of it. Just maybe stop and wonder at it. Or if you live in a community where you really never walked it, you drive in and out. Go for a walk. Just even if it's a brief walk, 2 blocks. That would be actually a phenomenal exercise. If you could do it in a community or where you go to work, you've never walked it, you always drive it, just walk it and notice what you notice, and it will be shocking to you. I never saw that before. I've driven past it 1,000 times and never seen it before.
And that can be a prayer, can't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that sense of God opening your eyes to the place you inhabit but haven't really been present to, that's I mean, if God shows you suddenly this house that seems dilapidated among other houses that don't, there's a story there, and if nothing else, pause and pray, "God, whatever the story is here, I lift up the people here," or the houses that seem to be impossibly brilliant and beautiful and well kept, but you never see anybody out in them. What is
Mhm.
that? So anyhow, I often walk my neighborhood. Now I'm in the woods, but I lived in a suburban neighborhood for many years. And every time discovered new stuff, and it does just by its nature make you prayerful. You start praying for your neighbors, for your neighborhood, for the stuff you see.
That's so great. I did that this morning. I walked by a house I walk by every day, and it's trash day, and I saw that they had one of those stools you put in the shower. And I
Yeah,
had one of those when I broke my ankle. So I was like, oh, I know what that is. And so I just prayed for that
good.
neighbor.
Yeah.
I don't know why they have that and why that box is in the trash, but
It's
the opportunity
sacramental,
to
right? The
pray.
sacraments of the ordinary that connect you with some deeper thing. And you don't even know what the deeper thing, you just sense it.
Yeah, connects us all together in God's beautiful world. Well, thank you so much, Mark. This was really a fun discussion. And I wish that we could go for a walk together. That would
I
be
do too.
such a delight.
I would love that, Deb. Thank you. I just love that we kind of walked the trail where the trail took us today. So thanks for being a good guide.
Before we close, I invite you into a simple guided practice, an invitation to walk out what we've heard today. If it feels right, you're welcome to take these next few minutes on your feet, moving at your own pace. You're also welcome to stay just as you are and follow along through another form of movement, or even in your imagination. Let's begin by standing at the edge of a familiar place, your driveway, a favorite path, a street you usually rush down without noticing. Let your body arrive before your thoughts do. Feel the aliveness of being human, the quirks, the aches, the passions, the tenderness of living in a body that tells the truth long before the mind can put words to it. Allow humility to guide this walk by accepting yourself as you are and being willing to inhabit your life as it truly is, without performance, without hurry. Now look down at your feet. Name your dominant foot, God's love. Name your less dominant foot, my humility. As you begin walking, chant silently or aloud, God's sustaining love, my humility. God's sustaining love, my humility. God's sustaining love, my humility. Can you feel the cadence? Let this rhythm guide you. Once you find your stride, pay attention to what stirs within you. Notice if there's a warmth in your chest, perhaps a tug of curiosity. Maybe there's a flicker of grief or gratitude. These small resonances are often where God's presence burns quietly, like on the road to Emmaus, where bodies sensed long before minds could make sense of what was happening. And as you notice whatever it is that stirs, simply ask, what in me hums in response to this place? What burns quietly with recognition or longing? What resonates with God's presence here in the ordinary? And as you return to your cadence, God's sustaining love, my humility. What humble response might you make today to God's love? Let it be simple, embodied, real, something that keeps the hum alive. Enjoy your walk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Betwixt podcast. It has been a real pleasure to produce this podcast for you. Catch you next time.